Hi guys, welcome and namaste to the Yoga Out of the Box podcast. My name is Marv, and on this podcast, we try to make yoga as accessible as possible for everyone as a kind of modern lifestyle, and haste young yoga teachers on their journeys to learn more about like the different styles of yoga, the different shapes of yoga, and how this can affect your personal journey in life and in yoga. And that's why we bring you each week a new super interesting episode with like a interesting person, a yoga practitioner, teacher, movement coach, or like mindfulness, mind technique teacher from all around the globe. This week, I had the honor to talk to Shawna, who is not just like an amazing yoga teacher of Rocket Yoga, but as well like a podcast host. And we talked about one of her passion topics, the topic of leadership and yoga. Actually, in this episode, I think we had like a lot of different variety in points. So we talked about like the business of yoga, how to start out as a yoga teacher, and how to really build your brand, how to really help people with what you're teaching. And for that, we got into the journey of Shauna herself. And I think there's something in there for everyone. So I hope you enjoy the same way I did. And like always, feel free, please, to leave a good review on the podcast player of your trust, to share the podcast with family and friends, and make sure to follow the podcast on Spotify and on YouTube, and maybe, as well on Instagram. That would really help us out, and let's dive right into this episode.
Much more like super official. Hey Shauna, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well, and I'm really excited to be here. I was stoked when you reached out and got to see a bit of your work, and I love seeing other folks who are doing podcasting work in the yoga world because those are my two favorite things. So yeah, I'm doing well. I'm excited. How are you?
I'm super good at the moment, so thank you so much for this kind introduction already. I think this is like even the perfect kickoff because you already have like your yoga podcast, and when I found out about this, I was like even like super stoked to get you on the podcast because I think there's so much we can talk about, and I think so much value you have to share as well. So Shauna, maybe for the people who not already know you in the audience, could you like take us back into your shoes, like when you started your yoga journey, or just give us a short wrap up about like your background?
Sure. Yes. So what I'm doing today is definitely not what I intended to do. Even back when I was working in law, and I quit my job and I'm like, I'm going to be a yoga instructor. Even now, what I'm doing today is something that 2 years ago I had no idea I was going to end up doing. So, what I'm doing today is essentially that I do teach yoga. I teach rocket yoga and I teach progressive Ashtanga yoga, and I host international retreats. In addition to that, I host a leadership and yoga podcast and have created a guided journal with my best friend. So that's kind of what I do now. But man, way back, the start of my yoga journey, I started yoga because my dad actually took me to a yoga class. I mean, I started it with my mom when I was really little, and she took me to a little kids class. But then my dad started taking me on the weekends when I didn't have sports because I was a big athlete growing up, and he invited me to go with him to the gym, and we somehow like started taking the yoga class at the gym. And it was hilarious because people would be downstairs like dropping weights and loud music, but it was, even like though it wasn't the perfect environment, I felt immediately like this is something for me 100%. I must do more. I didn't really dedicate myself fully though to yoga until probably the pandemic times. I was one of those people, about four or so years ago now, that I actually started practicing every day. And that became kind of a oasis for me within the direction that I was going at the time, which was super unaligned. I was going down the path of wanting to become an attorney. And I think that we need attorneys, like we need lawyers in the world. But for me, it was something that I was doing because I liked people's response. I loved hearing this, like, oh, wow, that's so great. Like, good for you. And now when I tell people what I do, they're like, oh, like, are you okay? Like, are you okay in the long run? Like,
Yeah.
is this sustainable? It's so funny. But yeah, when I started seeing, honestly, thankful, super thankful for the yogis in the Instagram world and the YouTube world, because they were doing something that looked better to me than sitting behind the desk filing papers where I was. So that's honestly the spark of how I really got into dedicating myself to the practice.
That's so interesting because it's like a completely different way to start out. Because I think most of the people not starting out from like getting involved in yoga with their parents, or at least not with their dad,
Yeah.
going to the gym.
Yeah.
And even more so, this perspective change that you got into it like more or more frequently, I think a lot of people can relate to in COVID times. It's amazing that this is already like 4 years ago. Felt like super quick and super long in the same time. What was it which got you hooked in the first place on yoga?
In the first place, what got me hooked? I would say there were 2 points that I felt hooked. And one of them was definitely when I saw the teacher do pincha. I was one of the people
Oh
who,
yeah.
I feel like initially the physical feats of the practice were just so opposite compared to what I was doing, because I was doing distance running and I was doing basketball. And
Oh,
I could
okay.
not touch my toes. Like, I literally could not touch my toes. I went to my first class in track shorts or maybe basketball shorts. I don't remember. One of those two. And I remember that she taught pincha that day. And it's funny because I'm actually still in contact with this teacher. Shout out to
Oh,
Katie.
really?
Yeah, I've had many impactful Katies in my life, but this is not Katie Williams. It's a different Katie. And Katie Williams is my business partner and best friend now. But I would say that initial physical feat and seeing somebody with so much grace and so much power was captivating to me. And luckily, it gave me a dose of inspiration rather than intimidation, because it could have gone both ways. So that was one. And then the second one was in the pandemic times. Like I was mentioning, I was working from home, I was living at my parents' house. It was just kind of a low. Felt like I was meant for great things and then ended up in this space that just was underutilizing me. And I also wasn't having the best attitude about it. And I decided that I was going to get on my mat every single day. And I read Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. And I was like,
Wow,
I'm going to
yeah,
be a
what a
yoga
great book.
teacher. It's a great book. So I just decided to get on my mat every day. And I was wondering, okay, what is going to happen if I don't miss a day? And I've missed many days since then. But of course, in this initial immersion period, it completely transformed me, honestly.
Yeah, it sounds like that. And I think it's like super interesting how this kind of super low episodes in our life and like this kind of, feeling stuck in the long run are like the most transformative like episodes of our life. And like when we decide to really full going into it and really make this kind of change. So, I mean, it's even like, I think a lot of people can relate because I think a lot of people got into yoga from, like you said, from these online teachers from YouTube when they had like no other chance but just their four walls, their body, and like maybe a mat. So a lot of people started out in this days. But how do you think changed your perspective on yoga on the long run? Because when you started out, you not could even touch your toes. Now you're like doing rocket and progressive ashtanga, which is like on the upper end of like strength and flexibility in the yoga space. How do you find your way into that?
Man, I feel like I've always enjoyed pushing limits. I'm kind of one of those people where if
That's
there's
why
an
Pincher was
extreme,
inspiring.
yeah, exactly. If there's an extreme, I'm curious at exploring that extreme.
Mhm.
And so, honestly, recently I've been reevaluating and kind of redirecting some of my time that I'm spending on yoga to actually do things like body and brain, which is Korean yoga and very much more energetics based. But
Okay,
I'll tell you
interesting.
that we can talk more about that too. But I think everything ebbs and flows. As you're saying, like we have these incredible peaks where everything is going fine. And then we hit a point that is, come to Jesus moment where we're like, something has to change. I cannot continue on this path right now. And so that might be an injury, it could be burnout. But for me, when I started getting into yoga more seriously, it just had a odd, inexplicable love for handstands. I don't know where this was from, honestly. I don't know if it was seeing other people do it, but I even remember kind of earlier on, before I got super into yoga, I was already curious about handstands. I never did gymnastics or anything like that, but I just thought it would be really cool to be able to have balance upside down. And so I ended up finding rocket yoga and Ashtanga kind of by accident because I was on vacation in Puerto Rico, and somebody
yeah.
messaged me who is an acquaintance. Yeah, I actually just got back from Puerto Rico a few days ago. Somebody messaged me that was just a yoga acquaintance on Instagram and told me that I was really close to this awesome studio and these awesome teachers, and I had to go take a rocket class. And I was like, what is that? I don't want to be bothered. I'm on vacation. I'll do it later. And so I didn't go, honestly, in that moment, which is funny because looking back, that was a huge missed opportunity. But I got home and I started researching and looking at these different teachers and this practice, rocket, and I was captivated. I thought, this is exactly what I've been looking for. I had already wanted to redo my 200 hour. I wanted to learn assist. I wanted to be incredible with hands-on assist, and I wanted to do handstands. And so rocket is pretty much, my kryptonite in that sense, because exactly what it is. So that is how I ended up quitting my job, because I had to, because it was a month-long immersion in Puerto Rico. And so I quit my stable job, and that's the last time I've had a 9 to 5, which at that point, that is 2 years ago now. And that was not exactly the plan initially, but, I just kind of got wrapped up in the world, and I was around finally other people who were full-time in the yoga world. And I had just started to kind of collect different friends and acquaintances that were proof of concept for me. And I was like, you know what? If not now, then when? I might as well send it. Yeah.
That's super inspiring. So congratulations in the first place.
Thank you.
Because I think a lot of young yoga teachers or people just starting out on their journey of yoga have thoughts like you told in the beginning, where as well asked to you, you're sure that this is sustainable and you're sure that you want to dedicate your business career and all you could achieve with your college degree and anything, really want to go into the yoga space. So
Yeah.
when did you make the decision to really, so you fully commit after you found the style of a rocket and you thought it's right for you, but was there a point where you said, okay, I really not just want to do my own practice and want to dedicate more time of my free time to that, but I really want to go into this for a kind of making a living out of that?
Yeah. I think I just could not see myself any longer on the current path that I was on in the law firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually don't think, looking back, I don't encourage people that you must quit. I think you can actually start a lot of your own things on the side. And in terms of time and not having time, it's hilarious. Even my mom is recently retired, and she says all the time that she still doesn't have time for things because things take as long as you give them, right? So you can actually do a lot of things while you're still employed. But in this case, oh my gosh, I remember waking up in the morning after quitting that job because I had a really great boss and it was a really nice paying job. It was remote. And I was like, what have I done? This is so bad. I had these moments of panic. But like you said, I had the deep underlying belief that I could do it. And honestly, it's a lot harder than I thought it was. But I still don't believe the rhetoric of that you can't make money and that, there's so many people discouraging. I feel like people who want to go into alternative career paths. And I think that's really silly because we need people in these areas more than ever. And it is super hard, but if you're up for the challenge, it pays off and it's extremely rewarding.
Hey, just a short reminder to make sure to follow the podcast along, to like the episode, to leave a comment, and to share the episode and the whole podcast with family and friends who could be interested in the topic of yoga. And now right back to the episode with Shawna.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of points in there I would like to point out. So first of all, it's incredible when you think back and you say, okay, it's not just like everything went well from the beginning, right? So you have this kind of panic and you're thinking, oh, wow, was this a mistake? Because I think even nowadays in this world of social media, and I think we will talk about this maybe later as well, there's a lot of like, like how to describe it, like everything is like super glamorous and everything is super fun. And of course, everybody's showing off how good they are and how professional, and everybody is like an entrepreneur and like digital nomad. And I mean, I was living in Bali for a while, and it's incredible how many people you meet, but it's really rare that people point out, oh yeah, this is like a real kind of career you can take for making a living out of that. And it's not just like, there's not just this super high end, everything is going super well and you're like super high, but there are also these points in between where you maybe feel a bit lost and you're like, okay, is this real? Do you do the right decision, right? I think this is important to remember for a lot of people. But as well that you said, okay, wow, you take the challenge, because it is a real challenge. Do you remember when you started out, like, do you had like a kind of plan or how you want to do it? Because I mean, like teaching in school, teaching like your own retreats, like you're doing now, is like a big gap in between, right? Or teaching online as well.
Yeah. I wanted to be a traveling yoga teacher trainer. And that's because that's what I saw around me. That's the model that I was exposed to first. And I now no longer actually even want to teach teacher trainings. I mean, I may end up doing it at some point, but it is not part of my current plan. But yeah, that's what I wanted to do. You know, I wanted to travel all around the world and just teach teachers essentially and give teacher trainings. And that was something that I had seen work for colleagues of mine, that they were able to live from it. And I was like, great. I found out pretty quickly that you cannot rely on studios to earn a living. And I actually now have I have one really wonderful studio that pays me very well, and I'm deeply thankful. But I've had the experience here in the city of Seattle with people and studios not paying me for 2 months, right? Or not paying me the rate that is specified in the handbook, and having to go through this like giant battle. And so I'm actually glad that that happened, because I immediately was like, well, you turn out of that way of thinking. I'm definitely not going to try to, teach 20 classes a week and rely on studios. I don't want that to be my method either. And then I leaned into the coaching world and was thinking for a while that I wanted to do coaching, right? So the evolution of things. But I'm glad also for my time in the coaching world, because that brought me to the theme of leadership and leadership in yoga, the podcast that now I host, because of my fascination with this idea of leadership and leadership training. So now I've gone on this whole circle, and I don't know if I've, really properly answered your question, but that's pretty much it. I knew that I wanted to build a business ecosystem. I knew that I wanted to create different ways for people to connect with me. And I did throw a lot of darts at the wall. I still have classes up on YouTube, and I'm talking like this was like 5 years ago. This was last year, posting a class a week on YouTube for a while. I was, started the podcast, thankfully. The thing that made the difference was just having focus, because you cannot do it all. There's a lot of FOMO, I think, in the digital, entrepreneurship world, where you're like completely content with your direction, and then you're scrolling on social media and it's like, here's 5 hacks to instantly double your income, and then you're like, shit, now I have to like go do this other thing that I wasn't even thinking. And you just get redirected like that, right? So avoiding the FOMO of it and the kind of just sporadic action, and sticking with one thing and knowing that it's a slow burn is key. It has been key for me.
Yeah, I think I can just give this back as well. So it's just like about consistency in the long run, and really like trying to blend out right and left and what everybody else is telling you and what everybody else is doing at this moment, which is like maybe the best and on another road. So I can totally relate to that. So what I find interesting is that you said you created like a lot of dots in the beginning, and now you're more and more, you like you figured kind of out from trying out what you really want and what is interesting for you. So you came up with your podcast, Leadership and Yoga. And can you maybe give the audience as well like a input in what you are doing there on the podcast and what your podcast is all about?
Yeah. I would say my podcast is about my main message that I have to share with the world. And I think that more than anything has been what's given me a true north in terms of everything that I'm doing in my business, and also how I'm living has to do with that sense of direction of message, right? So essentially it's about having more leadership in yoga and also more yoga in leadership positions, because I had these key influences. I had a boss in the law firm world who was incredible. He was a yogi. I mean, obviously, he was an executive director, so he wasn't like spending months in India or something like that, but he was into yoga and he had incredible leadership facilitation skills. He had a really level head on his shoulders and was just super effective. And I'd also had the experience of terrible bosses who were the polar opposite. And so I was like, this is cool how yoga is a part of this person's life and also a part of how they lead and how they show up. And then in the yoga world, I was noticing all of these things that I was learning about coaching and about people skills and about presentation and about sharing our ideas. They were really missing. I had taken many trainings. I had been around a couple of senior teachers, and I felt like, wow, we are basically giving, a class is a lot of things. It's not just a performance, it's not just a presentation, it's a full-on experience, but there is a major public speaking part of that. And there's also major leadership part of that, because people look up to you and they sometimes end up idolizing you. And that can be like open a whole nother, box of worms. But I decided in that moment that there was a really cool overlap and there's things that could be learned from both ends of the spectrum. So that's kind of how I think of, what's going on in the Leadership and Yoga podcast. But honestly, it's a lot of storytelling. It's very lifestyle, because that's the kind of content that I enjoy learning and listening to from people, is what we can learn through stories. I think that there's so much power in a good story.
I think what sticks out to me is like, that was exactly what I was listening. So I was listening to some of your episodes before the podcast, because it was like, okay, you should like get a bit into it. And I think you really feel in your podcast that you're talking about this kind of topics which came to you pretty naturally. So this combination and on your path, like you laid it out now, makes absolutely sense for me. And I think it's like a super, super important topic, because I think even a lot of beginner yoga teachers can like maybe become better teachers from like thinking about how they can lead in a class, because a lot of people are still afraid of, okay, how do I take this lead in the class? And it's more about, like you said, taking as well the people in the class on a journey, right? And I think there are a lot of leadership skills which are important to that. What do you think would be your advice for beginner yoga teachers or for people starting out in this kind of space to implement more kind of leadership?
Yeah. I love that you asked me this question, because I feel like I've been on the other end of this, asking people this question probably like 40 or 50 times. So I love that you're asking me this. I would say number one, and this is because this is what helped me the most, would be to understand that you're not everybody's teacher. You don't need to be liked by absolutely everybody. And the people that you should be taking feedback from, you should be absolutely taking feedback, right? I'm not saying that you should just go and like, this is me, take it or leave it. If you don't like it, screw you. It's not the point. The point is to take really targeted feedback, which is only from people who are where you want to be, or teachers who have a style that you enjoy. And you say, yeah, I would like to be like that. I like how this person is being, or the type of student that you want to serve and that that you can help, right? Because there are some teachers who may be absolutely incredibly talented, but you don't want to be like that. You don't want your class to be that same experience. And there also are going to be students where a lot of times what you get in feedback is response bias. It's the people who had an amazing time and it's the people who had a terrible time. And a lot of the people who go and are like, enjoying it, but not enough to make a big deal about it, they're just silent. So you don't get to hear from those people as much. So within this, starting to understand what the style is and what the kind of experience is that you want to provide is key. I think thinking about how you want students to feel during any particular class is big, right? So, and I'm not saying that I always go for excitement and inspiration and high energy. A lot of times I do, but I do also have other evening classes that are chill. But yeah, a lot of times I do like to bring people up a little bit, and I like to have moments of intensity. And that's not for everybody, right? Not everybody wants to do extreme things. Even though I teach it from zero, some people just don't want to eventually learn how to do a handstand because they don't care. And that's fine. Can't relate, but they don't care. So yeah, I would say just in short, starting to increase your confidence in what it is that you have to offer and not getting bogged down in advice or stylistic things and even cues and worrying about just checking every single box. I think that can really weigh people down and make them feel really overwhelmed. And then the experience of the class is clunky. Even if it's like a perfect, a textbook class with perfect cues, then the experience can be clunky. And at the end of the day, people are going for that experience. They don't know. They're not a Sanskrit expert. They're not a, anatomy expert a lot of times. So yeah, that would be my advice.
That's a great advice. And I think it's more than just one advice at the time, because
yeah,
I think I felt that you're prepared for this question already.
Listen to my TED talk. Yeah.
That's amazing. Because I think, so what I would like to point out is what you said before as well, that it's not just about like taking all the feedback or not taking any feedback at all. Because even on the other hand, if people are like super excited, and we tend to take the positive feedback as well, if it's not like the right kind of student you want to teach, or if it's not like the kind of teacher you really admire, you think, okay, I want to go in this kind of direction, you have to reconsider this, right? Yeah. You have even to take this like through a kind of filter. And I think what happens a lot is you get like a lot of positive feedback in the first place and maybe some bad feedback. And yeah, you have to think about, okay, the people are coming mostly for the teacher. They're coming for the whole experience, but which is really selling the class is the teacher. And like you said, you can be the perfect Sanskrit speaker, or you can have like the perfect kind of cueing. If you can't transport this kind of feeling to the right kind of audience, this is what makes a great class to like a really, really great class, right?
Exactly.
When you now teach and when you now go into your kind of, you're producing your podcast and you have your journal as well, how can the people like imagine your day-to-day life? Or how do you imagine like when you have like your own practice at the time? Do you include a special kind of practice, or has your practice changed over the time?
Yeah. It's changed so much. My schedule has shifted recently for two reasons, which is that I'm now releasing 2 episodes a week. And so the first half,
this is amazing.
Yes. The first half of the week for me is usually the time that is a little bit more chill, and I have kind of that extra space to work on developing new website pages that have been kind of on the back burner. But I just structure everything in Notion. I have 2 lists that are like to-do lists, and I have the one column that's just like really extensive, and then I have the column to the right, and I just drag over like what my top priorities are essentially. So Monday, Tuesday are more of those days that I'm kind of getting that sort of stuff together. I'm recording interviews with guests, which I usually do in bursts. I will do, 3 in a week and then none for 2 weeks. That's the way that I usually do that. I'm very cyclical. I feel like I like to go through phases of working really intense. And honestly, I will not lie, like people say you quit your 9 to 5 to have more time. I'm like, I quit my 9 to 5 to work, 12-hour days a lot of times. But I also count in that work is my time for training, like you said. So I still do practice not a traditional Mysore. I'm not into the Ashtanga world like somebody who is, super strict. But my teacher is Ashtanga based, although he calls the practice just self-guided. And he's really wonderful. Troy Lucero, if you are ever in the Seattle area, I always recommend checking out his space. And he has an eye for understanding people's body and movement just by looking at you. It's a thing that cannot be developed any other way, I believe, than spending 35 years in the Mysore room like he has, every single day. So I train there with him. But recently, honestly, I've had a back injury that I've been healing. And so I've been doing all kinds of things. I've been walking again, running again, cross training. And yeah, I just really went super intense into like hollow back handstanding and training like crazy. And this is a pattern of mine that I'm very aware of where I go really intense and then I'm like, okay, we need to back off before we get seriously injured. So luckily I'm fine. I still practice like normal, but I've just dialed it back and I've been cross training a lot. So, but yeah, I would say every day is movement is in some form is a non-negotiable and it usually happens in the morning. Yeah.
Super cool. I think even like, structuring your day, even if it's like 12-hour like working days, people think, oh, wow, you got self-employed. And it's really like, working for yourself all the time. But I think there's as well like a kind of freedom in that, right? Freedom is not like having all the time of the world. It's like dedicating for stuff you really want to do and like having the chance to dedicate yourself to something. So I totally feel that. And I have the feeling, so having all this podcast interviews stuck into like 3 days, this is like a lot. I think preparing this can be like super overwhelming, even like you have to create this room as well, like in the yoga class or like, like in leadership, like you explained, it's like creating the space and holding the space for people. This can be like super exhausting. So I think it's like super interesting that you're not just doing like dogmatic style of yoga, but you're like going into different kind of styles, what feels good, and you're exploring a lot.
Totally.
Would you say that so you trained Ashtanga like really strictly before, or you always had like a more open approach to like different kind of teachings?
Yeah. So I started out teaching a vinyasa flow, and I taught that for a year before I redid my 200 hour. And when I redid the 200 hour, I did it in progressive Ashtanga. And so that in itself even is not like I have led a full primary before, but it's not like it's not like I'm, certified specifically in something that is like, level 1 or level 2 Ashtanga. It's kind of its own school, I would even say, within Ashtanga. So, and the Rocket's based in Ashtanga as well, but has that softness. So I would say that no, there was never really the experience of me of like going deep into the tradition and then leaving it. I feel like I've always just been kind of on the side and I've pulled the elements that I really enjoy from it. Like I loved the first time that I ever took a lead full primary and the teacher just said, "Good morning, samastitihi, let's begin." And I'm like, how refreshing. I felt like it was so cool because you always feel like you got to start with some sort of, deep thoughts or something, and the energy in that in itself of just starting and getting to the yoga, I loved.
Something different,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can relate who have done like the first morning class like 5 a.m. and they're like, okay, let's get to work.
Yeah.
If you see yourself like in the next few years and like, I mean, even in the last 4 years, you have like made a big gap. Like there's like a lot what happened in between. What do you think with teaching now, even like your kind of retreats? Where do you head in the future of like your style of teaching?
Yeah. Well, I want to keep evolving the retreats that I'm doing. And so this upcoming one is going to be my fourth. Yes, it's going to be my fourth one. But I'm really big on introducing messaging and theme within the retreats. I've said this many times on my own podcast, but I love events like what Tony Robbins does. I love even the events that like Joe Dispenza does. I love this act of coming together as a group and doing the work, having breakthrough sessions and journaling and talking and dreaming and creating. And so I want to keep creating those kind of experiences that open the door for transformation. Of course, you cannot promise transformation, but it's usually very transformative if you give people the space for it. So I will continue doing those kind of retreats. I'm definitely going to have a retreat in Peru. That's going to be my next destination. And yeah, we'll see what else happens, because I'm moving to Austin as well, to Austin, Texas. So there'll likely be, different stuff in the works down there as far as retreats and also the podcasting world goes. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I hear more and more about like people moving to Austin. So I think there's even like a kind of space for that. That's for sure. What I, again, like in your journey, what is like always coming back is that you like take a lot of our different things you see, you like, and you create all of this together, right? So I think this is a kind of pattern of yours that you like, okay, I like this. Let's try to bring this into the kind of yoga. I think this is like a special thing what I miss sometimes when I see like a lot of Instagram or like, let's say, we have a lot of like yoga teachers out now, right? Everybody has done his 200 hours yoga teacher training. And I think there's like a lot of maybe not misdirection, but everybody wants to fit into this special kind of way, and everything should be like, it has to be like this, it has to be like super well and everything like fine. And I think it produces a lot of really similar kind of teaching styles and styles which are like not super innovative in a way. How do you think is like your style different to others when you think about like authenticity, or what would be an advice you could give people to like maybe create their own style?
Is this teaching yoga or in creating content?
Maybe
or
in
both. Okay,
maybe both, because it makes sense in both ways. And my thoughts are sometimes all over the place, but I hope you make sense out of that.
It makes sense. It makes perfect sense. I think the advice would be something similar anyways, which is to look, and I feel like this is just an old, like, I feel like somebody in the marketing world probably said this one time, and I probably read it in a business book. And so that might sound like very dry and superficial, but it's really just to look at parallel industries. And so for me, I look at a lot of times what people are doing in the comedy world. I love to see what comedians are doing, because comedians also have a personal brand, and they also go on tours, and they also have events, and they also have brand deals, right? So there's a lot there that you can learn. I also learn a lot from the coaching world. So that's why I would say that I mentioned Tony Robbins and these other people who are sort of facilitating transformation. But looking at parallel industries can be really, really helpful, but you have to develop a strong sense of what you do like and what you don't like, which I know might sound so opposite to, these philosophies of non-judgment and accepting all as it is, but I mean it more in the creative aspect, getting an idea and an understanding of, okay, what are the aesthetics that I'm actually drawn to? Like, not the one that everybody has, but what do I enjoy aesthetically? And what do I enjoy? Like, do I prefer more of a funny take on things? Do I prefer something dark and serious? Do I want it to be moody? Getting really clear on what it is that you do and what you don't like. And I will be honest, most of the time that I create content, it just doesn't come out to the vision that I have in my mind. I think I would need a film crew to make that happen. And so that's okay. And that's going to happen for sure. But yeah, starting to understand what it is that you like. So it's not just about looking at other people. I think that's how we get our ideas. But yeah, for sure, as you're saying, stop just getting ideas from other yoga instructors, because that is going to, it is a small pool, as you've seen, and even how you and I got connected. There are a lot of yoga teachers, but also, there's a lot of us. So like, let's diversify. Let's bring something truly authentic to the board. And I think the question of authenticity is a difficult one because we are so heavily influenced by what's going on around us that it's hard to say what is even your authentic desire sometimes, because you're just like, you're getting an idea from here and this person you love and they inspire you. And it's like that then becomes what you would see as the highest version of yourself. And is that the most authentic me? I don't know. Maybe it comes from a bit more surrender and taking time to just free write in the morning and see what comes out, what kind of themes are habitually coming through me. And that's a bit more, high in the sky, I guess.
Yeah, make absolutely sense. And I think in the end, it's as well, there are a lot of yoga teachers out there, but like you said, in the first place, there's a lot of like points out now in this world that, I mean, people working with this kind of stuff are like super, super necessary, right? I think we created like an environment which is like all about social pressure, about like a lot of angst and stuff like this. And so I think there's more space than ever, but you have to find like your own voice to like really go out and help people in the first place. But yeah, I feel it's like super interesting if you think about it, how often we maybe don't even realize what is our own inner voice. So what comes from us and what comes maybe from others or from influences. So I think we have to get back to the practice in the first place to maybe quiet our mind and really tune into ourselves.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, to kind of avoid just repeating things that we've heard said because they sound pretty, what's actually our experience of the practice. And those are not, like, it's almost frustrating things because if you're planning on producing content for later today, that's not going to be something that you're going to be able to suddenly, come into and understand. It's something that takes a really long time.
I think everybody who wants to like really create meaningful content came to this conclusion that he's like, oh wow, no, I can't do this at the moment. So sometimes you need this kind of sparkle, and then I have to do it.
Yeah.
Exactly like this. Wow.
Yeah.
Shawna, this was like amazing. Thanks a lot for all these insights. So maybe if people now would like to know more about you or would like to get in touch with you, what would be like the best way?
Sure. I'd say, I'm most active on Instagram. I don't really have other active social media, I guess, besides LinkedIn. But, I don't know. Connect with me there if you want to. It's just my name, Shawna Kruger. But yeah, Shawna Crew at Shawna Crew on Instagram, and my website, shawnacrew.com also. And yeah, I would say that the best place to really get to know me is the podcast. So Leadership and Yoga Podcast. I super love what you're doing as well. And it was an honor. So thank you for the thoughtful questions and for the connection today.
Thank you so much for that. I hope you have a great evening and hope to hear you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for hanging around so long, for listening to the whole conversation. I hope there was some value in there for you as well. And if it was like that, please make sure to follow the podcast. I know I repeat myself, but it's super important for us to grow and to reach more people with our mission to help young yoga teachers and help everyone to get a broader understanding of yoga. And that would really help us out. So make sure to do your karma yoga, and hope to hear you next week for a new episode. Stay tuned.